The Nagath fortress stood like a cancer against the alien sky, its bioorganic walls breathed with a rhythm that made most species sick to watch. Dr. Kim Tae-ho crouched in the shadows, studying the structure with the same careful attention he gave to complex surgery. The fortress was essentially a living creature, and he needed to understand its anatomy before he could operate inside. The fortress Private Lee Soo-jin hung in a biopod that slowly drained her life force. The young communications specialist tried to stay conscious as alien tubes fed on her blood. The other captives were in similar pods scattered throughout the structure. Two Krex troopers named Grok and Vex hung like statues while their stone-like skin turned pale. 3 Villani scouts, including Hopkeen's brother, Nipkeen, twitched in their restraints as the fortress fed on their fear. The Nagath guards were elite warriors, each one a veteran of battles across the galaxy. Their insect-like bodies were covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. Their mandibles could crush metal, and their claws could tear through enemy positions, but they had never faced a human operating alone in their own territory. Tae-ho approached the fortress through the waste disposal system. His medical knowledge helped him understand how the bioorganic structure digested and processed materials. The fortress was like a giant stomach, and he was moving through its intestines toward the areas where it stored living food. The first guards died in their sleep. Tae-ho's understanding of Nagath anatomy allowed him to strike at nerve clusters that would shut down their systems instantly. His movements were those of a surgeon, each cut precise and efficient. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary violence, just the systematic removal of obstacles between him and his patients. The fortress had dozens of guards, but they were spread throughout the structure, following patrol patterns that made sense for defending against armies. They were not prepared for a single infiltrator who moved like a virus through their living base. Each guard post fell silent as Tae-ho passed through like death itself. His medical bag revealed its true purpose as he worked deeper into the fortress. Alongside standard medical supplies were items that could serve multiple functions. Scalpels sharp enough to cut through chitin bone, saws that could remove Nagath limbs, and compounds that could be mixed into deadly poisons. The fortress began to sense something was wrong. Its bioorganic immune system detected foreign proteins from the dead guards, but the creature's responses were designed to fight infections and parasites. Not a single human who understood its biological weaknesses better than its own builders did. Tae-ho moved through the organic corridors like a surgeon, navigating a patient's body. His medical training helped him avoid triggering the fortress's defensive systems while he systematically eliminated threats. The guards fell one by one, their bodies hidden in the creature's digestive chambers where they would be dissolved and recycled. The holding area where the prisoners were kept was deep in the fortress's core, surrounded by the most dangerous defenders. Tae-ho approached through maintenance tunnels that carried the structure's life support systems. His knowledge of biology helped him understand which systems were vital and which could be disrupted. Private Lee Soo-jin's eyes widened as she saw a familiar figure moving through the organic passages, but this was not the gentle medic who had joked with her about Korean dramas. This was something else entirely, something that wore Tae-ho's face but moved with predatory grace. The human medic had changed during his journey through the fortress. The gentle healer was still there, but it was buried beneath something harder, more focused. His eyes held the same compassion, but it was now directed entirely toward his patients. Everything else in the fortress was just an obstacle to be removed. As he reached the holding area, Tae-ho began the delicate work of freeing the prisoners. His medical training allowed him to quickly assess their condition and determine the best way to remove them from the biopods without causing permanent damage. Each prisoner required different treatment based on their species and the level of drainage they had suffered. Lee Soo-jin was conscious but weak. Her human physiology had resisted the fortress's feeding better than the others, but she was still in danger. Tae-ho injected her with stimulants from his medical kit while he worked to free her from the alien restraints. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. The Krex troopers Grok and Vex were barely conscious. Their stone-like skin had protected them from some of the fortress's effects, but they were still critically weakened. Tae-ho used specialized tools to cut through their restraints while monitoring their vital signs. The Villani scouts were in the worst condition. Their sensitive nervous Systems had been overloaded by the fortress's feeding process. Tejo administered emergency medications to stabilize them while he planned their evacuation route as the last prisoner was. Freed, the fortress finally understood what was happening. Alarm systems that had been designed to detect large-scale attacks began screaming warnings throughout the structure. The remaining guards converged on the holding area while the fortress itself began to convulse with rage, but Tejo was ready for this. His medical knowledge had told him exactly how the fortress would react to having its food supply threatened. He had prepared countermeasures for each of the creature's defensive systems, turning his healing knowledge into tactical advantage. The rescued prisoners watched in stunned silence as their gentle medic prepared to fight his way out of the fortress. Private Lee Sujin supported the wounded Villani scouts while trying to process what she was seeing. The man who had bandaged her scrapes and brought her soup when she was homesick was now covered in alien blood and preparing for battle. The fortress's bioorganic systems triggered their final defense mechanism. The walls themselves became hostile, secreting acids and toxins, while defensive creatures emerged from hidden chambers. But Tejo moved through the biological maze like he was performing surgery on a living patient. Each obstacle was met with calculated precision. His medical understanding of the fortress's anatomy allowed him to predict and counter its defensive measures. What should have been an impossible escape became a careful extraction procedure. The other prisoners began to understand something about humans that their species had never grasped. The same compassion that made human medics risk everything for their patients could become something far more dangerous when those patients were threatened as they fought their way toward the fortresses exit. The structure's death throes began to tear it apart from the inside. Tejo guided his patients through the collapsing passages while the creature that had held them prisoner slowly died around them. The gentle medic who had started this mission was still there, but he was now something more, something that the galaxy was still learning to understand. The rescue was almost complete, but the hardest part was yet to come, getting his patients to safety while the entire Nagath army converged on their position. The rescue mission was supposed to launch at dawn, but Dr. Kim Tae-ho had already been moving through the dark forest for 3 hours. His boots made no sound on the alien ground as he followed signs that others would miss. Broken branches told him where the patrol had passed. Disturbed soil showed him where they had rested. Blood drops on strange purple leaves revealed where they had been hurt. Search team led by Villani Tracker Hopkeen was following the main trails using their official maps and scanning equipment. Their rabbit-like ears twitched at every sound while their sensitive noses tried to pick up scents in the alien air. They moved in formation like they had been trained with heavy weapons and communication gear. But Tejo was alone. He carried only his medical bag and the extra supplies he had packed the night before. His human intuition guided him toward places where logic said no one would go. The missing patrol had not just gotten lost, they had been taken by Nagath forces and dragged off the safe paths into enemy territory. As he moved deeper into the contested zone, Tejo began to change. The gentle medic who had comforted wounded soldiers seemed to fade away. Something harder took its place. His movements became more careful, more focused. His eyes scanned the environment like a predator looking for prey. His hands checked equipment that had nothing to do with healing. The first Nagath patrol never knew what hit them. 3 insect-like warriors were guarding a small clearing where they had set up motion sensors. Their chitinous armor gleamed in the morning light while their mandibles clicked. Together in their alien language, they were confident in their superior numbers and fierce reputation. Tejo approached from downwind, using his knowledge of anatomy to move without triggering their sensitive hearing. The Nagath had excellent vision and could detect most forms of movement, but humans had learned to hunt in ways that confused alien senses. Their unpredictable patterns and strange rhythms made them hard to track. The first warrior died without making a sound. Tejo's medical knowledge told him exactly where to strike to disable the nervous system instantly. The second warrior had time to turn around before surgical precision ended his life. The third tried to raise an alarm, but human speed and alien anatomy combined in lethal efficiency. The clearing fell silent except for the distant sounds of the forest. Tejo checked the bodies with the same careful attention he gave to wounded patients. His medical training helped him understand how each species died and what that meant for his mission. The Nagath had been moving wounded prisoners toward their forward base by the time the official rescue team reached the patrol's last known position. They found signs of a battle that made no sense. Nagath weapons were scattered in the grass. Their armor was cracked and broken in precise ways. Enemy blood stained the ground in patterns that suggested surgical strikes. But there were no bodies and no signs of the missing Allied soldier. Shopkeen's sensitive nose detected human scent, but it was mixed with something else, something that made his rabbit instincts scream warnings. His long ears flattened against his head as he tried to understand what had happened here. The scene looked like predators had attacked the Nagath patrol, but no such creatures lived on this planet. Captain Yoon Da-min studied the battlefield with growing concern. She had seen human medics work before, but this was different. The precision of the strikes suggested someone with intimate knowledge of Nagath anatomy. The efficiency of the attack indicated training that went beyond medical school. Meanwhile, Taeho continued following the trail deeper into enemy territory. His medical bag bounced against his hip while he moved through the alien landscape. The forest around him was filled with sounds that would terrify most humans. Strange calls from unseen creatures and the distant rumble of Nagath war machines. But Taeho felt calm. His breathing was steady and controlled. His heart rate remained normal even as he entered areas where death waited behind every tree. His medical training had taught him to remain composed under pressure. Whether he was performing emergency surgery or tracking enemy soldiers, the principle was the same. The trail led him to an abandoned Nagath outpost where the enemy had stopped to rest and tend their own wounded. The insect warriors had left behind evidence of their panic. Someone or something had terrified them enough to abandon their standard procedures. They had fled toward their main fortress, leaving equipment and supplies behind. Taeho examined the abandoned camp with scientific interest. His medical knowledge helped him read the signs of the enemy's condition. They had been carrying wounded prisoners, but the stress of being hunted had forced them to move faster than planned. That meant mistakes, opportunities, a chance to catch them. The outpost's communication equipment was still active. Taeho listened to the Nagath radio chatter with growing understanding. Their language was harsh and clicking, but he had learned enough to follow basic military communications. They were reporting attacks by an unknown predator, something that struck without warning and left no survivors. The enemy commanders were ordering all patrols to return to the main fortress. They were afraid of whatever was hunting their soldiers in the forest. The great Nagath Empire that had conquered dozens of worlds was retreating from a single human medic. But they did not know that yet as the day wore on, Taeho's pursuit became more intense. The trail was fresher now, and the signs of panic were clearer. The Nagath were no longer following their standard retreat procedures. They were running in fear toward the safety of their fortified position. The human medic followed them with patient determination. His medical training had taught him that healing sometimes required cutting away diseased tissue. The enemy soldiers who had taken his patients were a disease that needed to be removed. His hands remained steady as he checked his equipment. The forest began to thin as he approached the Nagath fortress. The massive bioorganic structure rose from the alien landscape like a tumor made of living tissue. Its walls pulsed with an unhealthy rhythm, while defensive weapons tracked movement in the surrounding area. Taeho studied the fortress with the same careful attention he gave to a patient's X-rays. His medical knowledge helped him understand the biological systems that kept the structure alive. Every living thing had weak points, areas where the right pressure applied at the right time could cause total system failure. The official rescue team was still hours behind, following the false trails and abandoned campsites. But Taeho did not need backup. He had found his patients. They were inside that fortress, being slowly drained of life to feed the enemy war machine, and that was something he could not allow. The gentle medic who had started the day treating wounded soldiers was gone. What remained was something else entirely, something that wore human shape but moved with predatory purpose. The Nagath had made a mistake when they took human prisoners. They had awakened something that their species was not prepared to face. As darkness fell over the alien world, Dr. Kim Taeho prepared for the most important surgery of his career. The patient was a fortress full of enemies. The disease was everything inside that threatened his people, and the cure was whatever it took to bring Private Lee Soo-jin and the others home alive. The morning sun on planet Zarian cast long shadows across the military base as Dr. Kim Taeho walked between the medical tents. His boots made soft sounds on the metal walkways while he checked his watch. The other medics were still sleeping, but Taeho always started his rounds early. He liked the quiet time before the chaos of another day began. The base was home to many different alien species, all working together against the Nagath Empire. The rabbit-like Villani medics with their long ears and soft fur found humans strange. The tall Krex doctors with their stone-like skin and deep voices respected human determination but did not understand it. The blue-skinned Zephyrian nurses moved like water and spoke in musical tones that most humans found beautiful. Tahoe carried his medical bag over his shoulder like always. Inside were bandages, medicines, surgical tools, and other supplies that every medic needed. But he also carried extra items that the other medics thought were unnecessary, small things that seemed unimportant to his alien colleagues, a few extra vials of stimulants, some tools that could be used for more than just medical work, a compact emergency kit that was larger than regulation size. The human medic was not tall compared to most species on the base. He had black hair and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. His hands were steady and gentle when he worked on patients. His voice was soft when he spoke Korean to comfort wounded human soldiers. The alien troops had learned to trust his quiet manner and careful touch. Captain Yoon Lam-min watched Taeho from the command center. She had served with many human medics during her military career. They all shared something special that she could never quite explain to the alien commanders. It was like they carried a fire inside them that only showed when their patients were in danger. Most of the time they were the gentlest people in the galaxy, but when someone threatened their wounded soldiers, something else came out. The base commander, General Thok, was an old Krex warrior who had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy. His rocky skin was covered in scars from enemy weapons. His deep voice could make the ground shake when he gave orders. He had not wanted a human medic assigned to his forward base at first. Humans were too emotional, he thought. They cared too much about individual soldiers instead of thinking about the bigger picture of war. But Taeho had proven himself. Over the past few months he never panicked. When the artillery shells fell close to the medical tents, he worked for hours without rest. When wounded soldiers needed help, he saved lives that other medics might have given up on. The alien medical staff respected his skills even if they did not understand his methods. That morning Taeho started his rounds by checking on a wounded Villani scout named Hop Keen. The rabbit-like alien had been injured in a patrol 3 days ago. His long ears twitched nervously when he heard explosions in the distance. Taeho sat beside his bed and spoke in gentle tones. His Korean words seemed to calm the alien soldier even though Hop Keen did not understand the language. Next he visited Krex Heavy Trooper who had lost his arm in battle. The stone-skinned warrior tried to act tough, but his eyes showed the pain he was feeling. Taeho changed his bandages with careful hands and gave him medicine for the pain. The Krex soldier grunted his thanks in his deep voice, but Taeho could see the gratitude in his ancient eyes. The medical bay was always busy with wounded soldiers from different species. Each one needed different types of care. The Villani were sensitive to loud sounds and bright lights. The Krex healed slowly but were very tough. The Zephyrians needed special medicines that worked with their unique blood chemistry. Taeho had learned to treat them all with equal skill and compassion. As the day went on, more wounded soldiers arrived from the front lines. The battle against the Nagath Empire was getting worse. The insect-like enemies were pushing deeper into Allied territory. Their weapons were cruel and their tactics were brutal. They never took prisoners and they showed no mercy to medical personnel. Many species avoided serving near the front lines because of the Nagath reputation for cruelty, but humans seemed drawn to the most dangerous assignments. Taeho had volunteered for this posting even though safer positions were available. Captain Yoon had asked him why he wanted to come to such a dangerous place. He had simply smiled and said that wounded soldiers needed help the most where the fighting was worst. The other medics found his attitude both admirable and puzzling. The Villani medics preferred to work in safe rear areas where they could help many patients without risk. The Krex doctors were brave, but they calculated risks carefully before making decisions. The Zephyrian nurses were skilled, but they avoided unnecessary danger. Taeho worked through the afternoon treating blast wounds, cleaning infected cuts, and comforting dying soldiers. His gentle manner never changed whether he was helping a human private or an alien general. He spoke softly to each patient, and his hands moved with practiced skill. The wounded soldiers seemed to heal faster under his care, though the other medics could not explain why. As evening approached, the base received troubling news. A patrol had gone missing. Near the contested zone, they had been due back hours ago, but there was no radio contact. The missing soldiers included 3 Villani scouts, 2 Krex troopers, and 1 human communications specialist. Private Leah Sujin was young and had only been on the base for a few weeks. She had become like a little sister to the medical staff, always bringing them food and helping with small tasks. The search and rescue teams were being organized, but the area was too dangerous for large operations. The Nagath controlled most of the territory between the base and the patrol's last known position. Enemy forces were thick in that region, and they had been setting more traps lately. Several rescue attempts had failed with heavy casualties. Taho listened to the briefing with quiet attention. His expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. The other medics noticed him checking his equipment more carefully than usual. He organized his medical supplies with extra care and added items that were not standard issue. Nobody questioned his preparations because medics always needed to be ready for casualties. Captain Yoon watched him work and felt a familiar chill. She had seen human medics prepare this way before. It usually meant someone was about to do something dangerous and necessary. The gentle healer was still there, but something else was stirring underneath. Something that the alien species had never learned to recognize or understand. That night, while the base settled into an uneasy quiet, Taho made his final preparations. His medical bag was packed with supplies that could serve multiple purposes. His movements were careful and deliberate, like a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. The other medics assumed he was just being thorough in case the rescue mission brought back wounded soldiers. None of them suspected that the quiet, gentle human doctor was about to demonstrate why his species had earned such a fearsome reputation in the galaxy's darker corners. The rescue mission would launch at dawn, but Taho would be long gone by then, following a different path toward a destination that would test every skill he had learned, both as a healer and as something much more dangerous. Private Li Sujin was out there somewhere in enemy territory. The young human soldier who had brightened everyone's day with her cheerful smile was now a prisoner of the cruel Nagath Empire, and that was something that Dr. Kim Taho simply could not accept. The fortress was dying around them as Dr. Kim Taho led the rescued prisoners through its collapsing corridors. The bioorganic structure convulsed in pain while its immune system launched desperate attacks against the infection that was destroying it from within. But the infection was not a disease, it was a human medic who understood the creature's biology better than its own creators. Private Li Sujin struggled to keep up with the group while supporting one of the wounded Villani scouts. Her communications training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared her for this. The gentle doctor who had shared Korean snacks with her was now moving through enemy territory like a force of nature. The Krex troopers, Grok and Vex, stumbled along behind them. Their stone-like bodies were tough, but the fortress's feeding had weakened them more than they wanted to admit. Grok had fought in 3-star systems and survived battles that destroyed entire armies, but he had never seen anything like what the human medic was doing. Taho moved ahead of the group, checking each passage before allowing his patients to follow. His medical bag bounced against his hip while he carried weapons taken from fallen guards. The gentle healer and the deadly warrior existed in the same person without conflict or contradiction. The fortress's final defenders came at them in waves. Elite Nagath warriors who had never known defeat charged through the organic corridors, expecting to find a standard rescue team. Instead, they met a human who fought like he was performing surgery. Each movement was precise and efficient, designed to eliminate threats. While protecting his patients, the rescued prisoners watched in amazement as their medic dismantled the enemy forces. The same hands that had gently treated their wounds now moved with lethal purpose. His medical knowledge of anatomy became tactical advantage as he struck at nerve clusters and vital organs with surgical precision. Li Sujin tried to help by using her communications equipment to contact the rescue team, but the fortress's bioorganic systems were jamming all signals. The massive creature was using its own electromagnetic field to prevent outside contact they were alone with their medic against an entire enemy stronghold, the Villani scouts. Nip Keen and his companions were barely conscious from their ordeal, but they could still sense the change in their rescuer. The human scent had shifted. From the gentle healer they remembered to something that made their rabbit instincts scream warnings. This was a predator in human form. As they reached the fortress's middle levels, the structure's defensive systems became more aggressive. The walls themselves attacked with acid sprays and toxic gases, while biological weapons emerged from hidden chambers. But Teho navigated through the death trap like he was reading a medical textbook. His understanding of the fortress's biology allowed him to predict each defense mechanism. The creature's immune responses followed patterns that his medical training had taught him to recognize. What appeared to be chaos was actually a systematic biological process that could be countered with the right knowledge. The group reached a large chamber where the fortress's heart pumped alien blood through massive arteries. The bioorganic structure's central nervous system was located here, controlling all its functions. Teho studied the pulsing organ with scientific interest while enemy forces closed in from all directions. Grok the Krex trooper managed to speak through his exhaustion, asking how one human could fight so many enemies. Teho's answer was simple: he was not fighting enemies. He was treating a disease. The fortress and everything in it were symptoms of an infection that threatened his patients. The Nagath commanders had finally realized what was happening. They sent their best warriors to stop the human medic, but their tactics were designed for conventional warfare. They had never faced someone who combined medical knowledge with combat skills in ways that defied their understanding. Teho began his assault on the fortress's heart using his medical instruments to target specific nerve clusters. The massive organ that controlled the creature's life functions was just another patient that needed surgery. His scalpels cut through bioorganic tissue while his patients watched in stunned silence. The fortress screamed as its heart was methodically destroyed. The sound was felt rather than heard as the creature's death throes shook the entire structure. But Teho continued his work with the same calm focus he showed in the medical bay. His hands never shook even as the world collapsed around them. Privately, Su-Jin realized that she was witnessing something that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity. The gentle medic who had comforted wounded soldiers was also capable of destroying enemy strongholds single-handedly. The same compassion that made him risk everything for his patients could become terrifying when those patients were threatened. The fortress's death created a chain reaction that began tearing the structure apart from inside. Teho gathered his patients and began the final phase of their escape. His medical knowledge told him exactly how long they had before the creature's biological systems completely failed. As they moved through the collapsing passages, the rescued prisoners began to understand why humans were both feared and respected throughout the galaxy. The same species that produced the most compassionate healers also created the most dangerous protectors. The fortress's outer chambers were filled with enemy reinforcements, but they were focused on containing the structural collapse rather than stopping the escaping prisoners. Teho used the chaos to his advantage, moving his patients through passages that should have been impossible to navigate. Captain Yundamin's voice finally broke through the electromagnetic interference as the fortress's jamming systems failed. She was leading the official rescue team toward the structure, but they were still hours away from reaching the extraction point. Teho acknowledged the transmission while continuing to guide his patients through the dying fortress. His voice was calm and professional as he reported their status. The gentle medic had returned even as the warrior remained ready to emerge again if needed. The rescued prisoners looked at their savior with new understanding. They had been saved not by a squad of elite soldiers but by a single human who refused to let his patients die. The same determination that made him work through the night to save wounded soldiers had driven him to single-handedly assault an enemy fortress. As they reached the fortress's outer shell, Teho paused to check each prisoner's condition. His medical training told him that they were stable enough for the final push to safety, but the hardest part was yet to come. The entire Nagath army was converging on their position. The fortress collapsed behind them as they emerged into the alien daylight. The massive bioorganic structure that had seemed invincible was now a pile of dying tissue, but Teho was already focused on the next challenge, getting his patients to the extraction point before enemy reinforcements arrived. Private Lee Soo-jin looked back at the destruction and then at the man who had caused it. Dr. Kim Tae-ho was adjusting his medical bag and checking his supplies as if nothing unusual had happened. The gentle healer was back, but she would never forget what else lived inside that quiet, caring exterior. The extraction from the collapsing Nagath fortress became a masterpiece of tactical medicine as Dr. Kim Tae-ho guided his rescued patients through the alien landscape the fortress's death had triggered. Seismic activity that was tearing the ground apart while enemy reinforcements closed in from all directions. Private Lee Soo-jin used her communications equipment to maintain contact with the rescue team while Tae-ho focused on keeping everyone alive. Her training had taught her to coordinate multiple units during combat, but she had never worked with someone who operated like the human medic. Each decision he made seemed to consider factors that no one else could see. Krek's trooper Grok found himself being supported by the same human who had single-handedly destroyed an enemy stronghold. The contrast was impossible to process. The gentle hands that now checked his vital signs had been covered in alien blood just minutes ago. The voice that spoke soothing words had been silent. During the systematic elimination of dozens of guards, Tae-ho's medical knowledge helped him navigate the unstable terrain as the fortress's collapse created sinkholes and toxic gas vents throughout the area. His understanding of biological systems allowed him to predict which areas would be safe and which would become death traps as the creature's remains continued to decay. The Villani scouts, Nipkeen and his companions, were barely conscious, but their sensitive hearing picked up the sounds of approaching enemy forces. The Nagath army was converging on their position with vehicles and aircraft that would arrive long before the Allied rescue team could reach them, but Tae-ho had anticipated this problem. His medical training had taught him to always have contingency plans for patient evacuation. He led the group toward a series of caves that his earlier reconnaissance had identified as potential shelter. The underground passages would protect them from aerial detection while providing defensive positions as they moved through the cave system. Tae-ho continued to monitor his patient's condition. The rescued prisoners were stable, but they needed rest and medical attention that he could not provide in the field. His medical bag contained emergency supplies, but not enough for extended treatment. The caves opened into a large chamber where ancient alien artifacts suggested this had once been a sacred site. The walls were covered in symbols that none of them could read, but the space felt somehow peaceful after the horror of the fortress. Tae-ho established a temporary medical station while Lee Soo-jin set up her communications equipment. The first wave of Nagath searchers arrived within an hour. Their aircraft circled overhead while ground forces spread out in search patterns. The enemy was using heat sensors and motion detectors to locate the escaped prisoners, but the caves provided natural shielding that confused their equipment. Tae-ho prepared for the inevitable confrontation by checking his remaining supplies. The fortress assault had depleted most of his specialized equipment, but he still had enough to deal with small groups of enemies. His medical knowledge continued to provide tactical advantages that conventional soldiers could not match. The Krek's troopers Grok and Vex had recovered enough strength to fight, but Tae-ho ordered them to stay with the wounded. Their stone-like bodies made them excellent defenders, but they were still weakened from their captivity. He needed them to protect the Villani scouts while he dealt with the approaching threats. The first Nagath patrol entered the caves with standard sweep tactics. They expected to find frightened prisoners hiding in the darkness. Instead, they encountered a human medic who had turned the underground passages into a carefully prepared surgical theater. Each chamber became an operating room where threats were removed with clinical precision. Private Lee Soo-jin watched through her night vision equipment as Tae-ho moved through the caves like a ghost. The same man who had patiently taught her Korean phrases was now eliminating enemy soldiers with movements that seemed almost artistic. Each strike was placed with the precision of a surgeon making incisions. The cave system amplified sound in strange ways, making it difficult for the Nagath to coordinate their search, but Tae-ho's medical training included understanding of acoustic properties from his work with ultrasound equipment. He used the cave's natural acoustics to confuse and disorient the enemy forces. As more patrols entered the underground network, they found evidence of their comrades' fate, but no bodies. The cave seemed to swallow the search teams whole, leaving behind only abandoned equipment and the growing fear that something inhuman was hunting them in the darkness. Captain Yoon Da-min's rescue team finally established clear communication with Lee Soo-jin's position, but they were still hours away from reaching the caves, and the Nagath forces were increasing their search intensity. The enemy commanders had realized they were dealing with something beyond their normal tactical understanding. Taeho returned to the medical station to check on his patients. His hands showed no sign of the violence he had just committed as he gently examined the wounded Villani scouts. The transition from deadly warrior to caring healer was seamless and natural, as if both roles were equally part of his identity. The rescued prisoners had stopped trying to reconcile the contradictions in their savior's behavior. They had seen enough to understand that human nature was far more complex than their species had realized. The same compassion that made human medics legendary healers also created protectors who would stop at nothing to defend their patients. As the day wore on, the Nagath search efforts became more desperate. Their commanders were receiving reports of entire patrols vanishing without trace. The caves had become a graveyard for elite warriors who had never known defeat. The psychological effect was devastating. Enemy morale throughout the region. Taeho used the growing panic to his advantage by launching selective strikes against enemy supply lines. His medical knowledge helped him identify which disruptions would have the greatest impact on their search operations. Each sabotage mission was planned with the same care he used for complex surgery. The underground chamber became a fortress where the rescued prisoners waited for evacuation while their medics systematically dismantled the enemy forces searching for them. The artifacts on the walls seemed to watch over them, as if the ancient aliens who had built this place approved of the violence being done in defense of the innocent. Private Lee Soo-jin coordinated with the rescue team while monitoring Taeho's condition through her equipment. The human medic showed no signs of stress or fatigue despite the impossible odds he was facing. His vital signs remained stable even as he single-handedly held off an entire enemy army. The caves echoed with the sounds of fleeing Nagath forces as word spread through their ranks about the invisible death that stalked the underground passages. The same warriors who had terrorized the galaxy were now running in fear from a single human medic who refused to let his patients be recaptured. As evening approached, the rescue team's aircraft appeared on the horizon, bringing hope that the nightmare was finally ending. But Taeho continued his vigilant watch over his patients, knowing that the mission was not complete until everyone was safely back at the Allied base. The extraction would be dangerous, with enemy forces still active in the area, but the human medic had proven that no obstacle was insurmountable when the lives of his patients were at stake. The gentle healer and the deadly protector were both ready for whatever came next. The rescue helicopters touched down in the cave clearing just as the sun began to set over the alien landscape. Captain Yoon Da-min led the extraction team with medical personnel and heavy weapons support, but when they reached the chamber where the prisoners had been hiding, they found Dr. Kim Taeho calmly checking vital signs as if nothing unusual had happened. The human medic had cleaned himself up and returned to his role as the gentle healer. His medical uniform was fresh and his equipment was organized with the same care he showed in the base hospital. The only sign of the day's violence was a slight tiredness in his eyes that disappeared when he smiled at the rescue team. Private Lee Soo-jin tried to explain what had happened, but her words seemed inadequate. The gentle doctor, who was now helping load wounded prisoners onto stretchers, had single-handedly destroyed an enemy fortress and eliminated dozens of elite warriors. It was impossible to reconcile the two images of the same person. The Krex troopers, Grok and Vex, were loaded onto medical transport aircraft while Taeho monitored their condition. His hands moved with the same gentle precision that had made him famous among the wounded soldiers at the base. The deadly warrior who had carved through enemy ranks was invisible beneath the caring medic's exterior. Captain Yoon watched the evacuation with professional interest, but her eyes kept returning to Taeho. She had served with enough human medics to recognize the signs, but seeing it in action was different from hearing reports. The transformation from healer to protector and back again was seamless and natural. The Villani scouts, Nip Keen and his companions, were conscious enough to whisper their Thanks as Teho checked their recovery progress, their sensitive hearing had detected the sounds of battle throughout the day, but they had only seen the gentle medic, who brought them water and medicine as the rescue team prepared to leave the caves. They found evidence of the day's events scattered throughout the underground passages. Abandoned Nagath equipment told the story of systematic defeats, but there were no bodies. The caves had become a graveyard that showed no signs of the dead. The flight back to the Allied base was quiet except for the medical equipment monitoring the rescued prisoners. Teho worked steadily during the journey, adjusting treatments and checking vital signs. His focus was entirely on his patients. As if the destruction of an enemy fortress had been just another day at the office general, Thok the Krex commander waited at the landing pad with other senior officers from different species. The successful rescue of the prisoners was being celebrated as a major victory, but the details of how it had been accomplished were still unclear. The reports from the extraction team seemed impossible to believe. The debriefing session was conducted in hushed tones as the various species tried to understand what they had witnessed. Teho sat quietly while others described the fortress's destruction and the elimination of entire enemy patrols. His medical bag rested beside his chair, containing only standard healing supplies. The alien medical staff looked at their human colleague with new respect, but also with confusion. The same gentle hands that had comforted dying soldiers had apparently torn through enemy defenses with surgical precision. The contradiction was too profound for most species to fully comprehend. Private Li Sujin's official report was filed with careful language that avoided speculation about human capabilities, but her personal observations would become part of the growing legend of human medical personnel. The galaxy was still learning about humanity's true nature. The other rescued prisoners provided their own accounts of the day's events, but their descriptions seemed like fantasy rather than military reports. The Nagath Empire's most secure fortress had been destroyed by a single human medic who claimed he had just been doing his job. Captain Yoon filed her report with the understanding that other human commanders would recognize the implications. The galaxy's various species were still discovering the full range of human capabilities, and the results were both inspiring and terrifying. Word of the incident spread through the Allied forces, adding another chapter to the growing collection of stories about human medical personnel. Other species began requesting human medics for their most dangerous assignments, not just for their healing skills, but for their unique protective abilities. The medical bay returned to its normal routine, with Teho making his daily rounds and checking on wounded soldiers from different species. His gentle manner remained unchanged, and his patients continued to heal faster under his care. The fortress incident might never have happened based on his behavior, but the other medical staff watched him with new awareness. The quiet Korean doctor who shared snacks with homesick soldiers was also capable of single-handedly destroying enemy strongholds. The gentle healer and the deadly protector were both real and both part of the same person. Private Li Sujin visited the medical bay regularly after her recovery, partly for follow-up treatment, but mostly to observe the man who had saved her life. She watched him work with the same calm precision, whether he was removing shrapnel from wounds or removing threats to his patients. The Nagath Empire's military commanders studied the fortress incident with growing concern. Their intelligence report suggested that humans possessed capabilities that defied conventional understanding. The same species that produced the galaxy's most compassionate healers also created its most dangerous protectors. General Thok requested additional human medical personnel for his command after seeing the results of Teho's work. The Krex military doctrine was being revised to account for human psychological warfare, capabilities that seemed to operate on levels other species could not comprehend. The fortress incident became a case study in human nature for xenobiologists throughout the galaxy. The same compassion that drove human medics to risk everything for their patients could transform into protective fury that would stop at nothing to defend those under their care. Teho continued his medical duties with the same dedication he had always shown. When questioned about the fortress rescue, he would simply explain that he had done what any medic would do, ensure that his patients received the care they needed. The methods required were just part of the job. The galaxy was learning that human nature contained multitudes, the same species that could produce beings capable of infinite Gentleness could also create protectors of terrifying efficiency. The contradiction was not a flaw but a feature of humanity's complex psychology in the quiet moments between medical emergencies. Tejo organized his supplies and prepared for the next crisis. His medical bag contained standard equipment, but his colleagues now understood that in the right hands any tool could serve multiple purposes. The human medic had become something of a legend throughout the Allied forces, but he remained focused on the work that mattered most. In a galaxy filled with warriors and conquerors, he had found his purpose in the simple act of keeping his people alive. The rescued prisoners had returned to their units with stories that would be told for generations. But for Tejo, the most important outcome was that Private Lee Sujin and the others had made it home safely. Everything else was just details in another day's work. The medical bay hummed with its usual activity as alien and human medical personnel worked together to heal the wounded. The gentle Korean doctor moved among his patients with the same compassion he had always shown. The fortress destroyer was invisible beneath the surface, waiting to emerge only when his patients were threatened. In the end, that was what made humans unique in the galaxy. The same heart that could break for a dying soldier could also find the strength to tear apart an enemy fortress. The healer and the warrior were not separate people, but different expressions of the same fundamental drive to protect those who could not protect themselves.